We will welcome everybody. I think we're now live for this session of the Creating Communities conference. Like many people, this is the first time I've used this particular form of online torment. So bear with us as we attempt to wrestle with the technology. I'm sure it will all work smoothly. It has done so far. And if it doesn't, you can blame me entirely, not our fantastic sponsors, JTP or Onward or Create Streets. So this is going to be a panel discussion with the provocative title of It's Better Up North. As you can probably tell from my accent, my definition of north is north of the River Thames. So I take it as a challenge to suggest that there has been some fundamental shift in the quality of life and the quality of our futures between the north and the south of the country. But needless to say, we are living through quite extraordinary times and literally anything is possible. So with that theme, we're going to be looking at the reality and the future of northern towns in particular in the very specific context of the recent political upheavals that we've all undergone and the government's levelling up agenda and, of course, the current pandemic crisis, which is potentially disrupting everything we thought we knew about economic geography, about the importance and nature of places, and, of course, about the way in which our communities and our societies interact with the places and the economies in which they find themselves. So is the new situation we find ourselves in a colossal challenge for northern communities, or is it actually also an opportunity? What are the key strengths of towns in the north of the country that maybe other places don't get to benefit from? How will a new generation of remote workers seek stronger communities, and how will that play out, particularly in the very different urban geographies of the north as compared to the London-dominated geography of the southeast? What will ultimately enhance or undermine the prosperity of towns right across the country? So before I open up to all of our speakers, let me first of all say that we're going to do a poll, which apparently is the new standard thing for all of these events. So hopefully the technological magic will work now. Okay, well, maybe while the technology is appearing, the poll is this: a very simple question. Do you think that for the north of England specifically, the COVID crisis represents, firstly, A, more of an opportunity for economic rebalancing than a threat to it, or is it more of a threat to economic rebalancing than an opportunity? Can we have the poll, please, Hugo? Nope. Doesn't seem that we can. All right, never mind. If that appears at some later point, I will try it again. You can be contemplating your answers as we get going. I would also ask everyone who's joining, and I see we're up to 38 people, so welcome everyone. Please do contribute questions. Type them into the box on the bottom right of your screens. That will really help our discussion later on. So yeah, please do feel free to throw out general questions to the whole panel or specific ones in responses to what you hear. I will also just remind all of the speakers who are dutifully all on mute now to unmute themselves when it is their turn to speak, because it has, of course, become the theme of lockdown is people shouting at computer screens going, "You're on mute." So, last chance for the poll before we get going. No? Oh, well, apologies if that was my fault. But without further ado then, Charles, are you ready to go?
Yes, I am.
Fantastic. In which case, I'll hand over to Charles Campion, who is not only a fantastic architect with great experience of community regeneration projects around the country, but is also as a representative of JTP, the kind sponsor of this event, and of course the author of the famous book 2020 Visions, Collaborative Planning and Placemaking. So who better than to introduce us to the theme of the conference and indeed this session, namely the way in which we can involve local communities more proactively and positively in planning for regeneration and change in their neighbourhoods. Charles, over to you.
Thank you very much. Well, we're delighted to be able to sponsor this session, and thank you to all the speakers who we'll hear from. I'm going to leave as much time to hear from them rather than from me, so I'll get going. Just to say that since forming over 25 years ago, JTP has worked throughout the UK, including Northern England, to create places and breathe life into old ones. Our collaborative placemaking process involves working with local communities to co-design visions and master plans for whole towns, town centres, existing and new neighbourhoods, and key urban and rural sites, And our goal is to co-create places with a strong sense of identity where life in all its senses can flourish. Places that are economically thriving, culturally stimulating and environmentally rich. Putting people at the heart of the creative process, in our experience, helps to unearth the real needs of community, inspire positivity and goodwill, and build consensus. And far from imposing ready-made, off-the-shelf solutions, we create visions together with the local communities, the local residential and business communities. To build on the opportunities and potentials of northern towns and cities, and I should say at this stage as well, I think we should include other parts of the country, and I was watching the previous session, the coastal towns, and I'm currently working a lot in Cornwall, for example, so I think there are a lot of issues in common. But there's a lot of the same points in common everywhere, and it requires an appreciation of the complex interrelationships that make up each place and the locally specific initiatives needed to drive them forward. As placemaking designers, we have found that combining local knowledge with professional expertise is key, and it builds consensus, and it sets the projects and the processes on the right path. Viewing places through the lens of collaborative placemaking, we've found is very important and can act as a proxy for having all sorts of other discussions. It can reveal new insights and develop balanced, appropriately scaled solutions where process can be as important as physical outcome. It can help economically by co-designing inviting popular places that will generate added value and will naturally attract investment. It can help socially, where all communities have resources of whatever type that can be tapped into by building networks of mutual obligation, support and trust. And environmentally, looking at a place holistically can develop locally based approaches that are needed to serve the interests of the entire community and the living world. Next, please. So the principles of placemaking, if you go online and have a look at these, I've just put these together. They always talk now, which is a great thing, about the importance of involving community and local stakeholders. Jane Jacobs, her famous quote, that cities have the capability, and towns I should say, have the capability of providing something for everybody only because and only when they are created by everybody. Next, please. It's important to really believe in a process if you're looking to follow a collaborative, participative process. And these core values I find useful. The International Association for Public Participation sets the ground rules really for a genuine participative process. The importance of design and drawing things. So often we are stuck in a world of letters, of words and of numbers, but drawing can actually break the mould and help to create innovative solutions and, as I say, bring people together. Not so much at the moment, we struggle getting too close, of course, but that process of co-design, as I say, acts as a proxy. It helps us to generate new understandings of our place. Next, please. And any process requires feedback loops. It's not just one chance for consultation, one question, and that's it. You're kept out of everything that happens later. There's this whole interactive feedback loop process. It's so important for genuine consultation and participation. Next, please. So we're very pleased that we were asked by MHCLG last year to run an exemplar charrette. They've been looking at process of community participation, and a charrette, a co-design process over a weekend, over a number of days, an intensive process where professionals work with the community, is part of a longer process. So you need to build up to the charrette, and then you need to understand the follow-on process. But in this case, in Lisgar, the former cattle market site, critical community and economic function that's now gone, sadly, but what to do next? And through this process, we involved several hundred people locally, beforehand, young people through schools, talking to local businesses, local community groups, and at the charrette itself to develop a new vision, which 18 months later has, just by chance, last week, delivered the first phase of a planning application, detailed planning application for a new workspace for cultural creative industry, which just passed through the planning system unanimously. Next, please. And our work in the north of England, particularly, I think the focus on working at a whole town level or a whole valley level, this was some work we did through the Yorkshire Forward Renaissance process as part of their panel in the noughties, where we started working with the whole town of Scarborough, which faced all of the problems of that we know about of seaside towns. And as you can see from holding up that picture, it's time that we really started to dress up as a wake-up call for the town. And again, working with a wide range of the local community, we had 1,000 people at this particular community planning weekend to create a vision which naturally focuses on key parts of the town. But a large element of this was that if you create a high-quality environment, people will want to go there, people will want to invest there. Next, please. And I think the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Awards are not everything, but they recognise what was achieved and is still being achieved in Scarborough. And I think the bringing in of the business community, particularly working with the creative and the residential community, to really start getting and addressing the town, drawing funding where it's available, but also attracting much greater proportion of private sector investment, led to these amazing awards, including the most enterprising town award in Britain, which then went on the following year to win that award across the whole of Europe. Next, please. We worked in the Upper Calder Valley after that, and I'm going to leave Jane and Mary to talk more about that. But again, working with a whole community through a whole valley of 5 settlements, who said to us, a lot of them, we've never actually worked together with the other towns, and understood so deeply what we can offer as a community together. And Incredible Edible has been one of the things to come out of that, but other towns, which is based in Tottenham, but other towns, Hebden Bridge, are nationally known places and have really built up since that time over 15 years ago, where the community came together, created a vision, and has gone on to realise it and create these fantastic places up and down the valley. Still with challenges, and Jane, I think, will talk about that. But how the community comes together to address it. Next, please.
Just 1 minute left, please, Charles.
Thank you. Nearly finished. And finally, Candle, we have Mark on the line to come. This was last year where we're working, and again, in this case, a business-led organisation called Kendall Vision, funding a vision process, was again engaged hundreds of people from the local community who desperately and passionately want to work and improve their town. It's amazing, Kendall, but it has so much more that it could offer, and particularly now post-COVID or through COVID. How do we respond to the challenges of young people creating new businesses, new enterprises? But that place-based approach, next please, which has so much potential. We were amazed at how much there is there in such a fantastic town, but how much opportunity that there is for change and for growth and to change the quality of the place. Next please. So if you're interested in any more case studies, my book, which was kindly mentioned at the beginning, has 20 international case studies of transformative projects that the community have helped to lead in partnership, it has to be said, with other groups and in particular local councils. So the partnership, the holistic approach is everything, but in my experience and our experience over 25 years, the communities want to be at the front and centre of changing their places and creating robust and thriving towns and cities around the north of England, but around the whole of England as well. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Charles. That's an excellent introduction to the general themes that we're going to be unpicking here. So moving on to a slightly more one specific subset of these issues, I'm going to hand over to Cathy, who is an internationally renowned expert on high streets, which is a good thing too, because as we all know, high streets have been facing some pretty serious long-term challenges for many years. But particularly in the wake of the current crisis, I think we're seeing some really, really interesting transformations in the way that people are using and engaging with high streets of all different types. So without further ado, Cathy, over to you.
Oh, thanks, Toby. I'm the co-chair of the Institute of Place Management, which is a professional body and learning society for people that serve places. So we define them as people that sort of work in a place, and what their job is, their raison d'etre, is to make that place better. They might come from the local authority, the business community, the wider community. We're not bothered. We treat all of them as professional place managers when they behave like that. So what I'm going to talk about is a bit of our experience from IPM, and also in my role as research lead for the High Street Task Force, which is the government-led programme which is supporting town centres in England for the next 5 years with skills and training and advice. And I'm going to add to this discussion by talking about what we've learned from COVID in particular, because I think there's some important points to share. We took the decision in March to radically change the offer from the task force and from IPM because we'd never experienced anything on the scale of COVID before. And whilst footfall's been declining in our town centres for the last 10 years, and they've been changing to being more multifunctional from very monofunctional retail spaces, we've never had a time when people have been ordered to stay at home and forbidden to visit their town centres and high streets. So drawing on research from disaster management and the comprehensive research we've undertaken into high street and town centre change, we developed 2 frameworks early on, one for recovery, the immediate steps to be taken within the crisis, and then a route map for transformation. But most importantly, we've linked the two, and I'll explain why that's important. We knew as a community of place managers and leaders, it was important to think where we might go from COVID. For example, the temporary social distancing measures that were put in, for example, road closures, could be designed to become more permanent to help places address the long-term goals of being carbon neutral and ensuring there's better air quality for everybody to breathe. But because of the scale of the crisis, it's not the time to just be focused on the future. We've surveyed town centre businesses twice so far, once in April, once in August, and the results are on the High Street Task Force in the repository. And the blunt fact is many of the businesses that activate our high streets, that attract footfall, will not survive unless we do everything we can to help them now, from local patronage, business support and guidance, and the sort of national policy and funding that's needed. Unfortunately, place management and development is too often divided into the operational and the strategic, and different people do both, and they don't mix up enough. And that's a recipe, for things to go wrong. If we look at the plans for most regeneration schemes, I'm afraid we've had some great ones from Charles, so I'm not including yours, Charles, but we all know regeneration schemes where what's been delivered 5 years down the line looks nothing like the plans and all the lovely people walking around with balloons and all happy and so on. So instead, because taking that point, our route map was very much to ground ourselves in the present and work towards the future. And that was the approach that we sort of work with collectively. So every step, every action and every decision is going to take us nearer or further away, if it's the wrong one, from where we want to be. We have to be concerned with the operational detail. We firmly believe, from what we've observed over the last few months, how your town, your city centre or your high street has responded to COVID-19 is an indicator of how it can respond to anything. You're not going to be able to enact, really aspirational transformation plans if you can't sort of help the businesses that are there at the moment, help them recover. So we identified 4 common themes from working alongside the towns on their recovery frameworks. And these are things that are important now and important for longer term transformation. Effective partnerships. Places need to form partnerships that are right for what's happening now. They have to be refreshed. They can be informal and informal, but they have to include the council, business and wider community. There needs to be an adopted plan, whether that's at the very strategic visionary level or at the recovery level. They need to be agreed, there needs to be buy-in to them, and everyone needs to know what their place is within that plan. There has to be open communication. Through COVID, we saw webinars, newsletters, phone calls, social medias. So it seemed to be really recognised that you have to keep people in touch, you have to keep them informed. Lots of action. That was the 4th point. This wasn't planning for the sake of it. Much less talking and writing and a lot more doing. So you saw cycles of observation, decision, action, evaluation, dissemination, things that might take a couple of years normally to go through were enacted in weeks or days. So effective partnerships, adopted plans, open communication and lots of action. That reminded us of work that we did for the Economic and Social Research Council a few years ago, where we identified 4 sort of strategic approaches to regeneration. Restructuring is all about getting partnerships and governance right. There's just not the right partnerships at the moment, I'm afraid, to manage the evolutions of our high streets and town centres. And in the north in particular, there's a paternalistic culture in some local authorities that is a barrier to collaborative working. Repositioning is all about understanding how places are changing and developing quality visions and responses to that change. And I'm afraid local data and solid evidence is not the basis of most place decision making, and that's why the wrong decisions get made. Rebranding is all about establishing what's special and unique about a place, getting buy-in, commitment and changing perceptions if necessary through communication. Uncovering what's special about your place takes time and has to involve business in the community, local authority, young people, old people, everybody that's got a stake in your place. Not enough time goes into that, and not enough time goes into the communications. People feel left out and in the dark, and I'm afraid local papers and the national media are stuck in the doom and gloom narrative. But we're doing our best on the High Street Task Force to change that.
Just 1 minute.
Reinventing is about changing the offer of your town, activating the space and making things happen. Too much time is dedicated to remaking space, building this, knocking down that, without thinking about who and how the occupiers of that space are going to reinvent the town, because it's people that make places. So we've seen with COVID-19 that these strategic actions are still very relevant in the context of the pandemic. You have to have the right people, the right structures, the right evidence, the right interventions and plans that people believe in, good communication to bring people with you and encourage debate and a much more action orientated culture. In the north, I'd say it's the governance structures that are letting us down. Not enough genuine partnership working and collaboration, and not enough professional place management. It's a real skill to herd all these high street cats. And this isn't helped by a confused national agenda around localism, devolution, and not to mention the lack of funding to do things differently. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you very, very much, Cathy. Lots of food for thought there, and very impressive you managed to pack that much into your 7-minute slots. Thank you. Okay, for the next 3 speakers, we're going to focus down onto, I think, some slightly more specific examples, starting first of all with Jane Scullion from Calderdale, who as the member of cabinet for regeneration for the council, presumably has huge amounts of experience of actually inflicting paternalistic attitudes and a stuck in the mud attitude to benighted local communities. So Jane, over to you.
Thank you. Guilty as charged, probably, but I'm a relatively new councillor and a new cabinet member, so I'm trying to learn new ways. And thank you, Cathy. I want to touch on 3 themes in talking this afternoon. I want to talk about Calderdale as a distinctive borough, northern borough. I want to talk about the different ways in which we've tried to repurpose our industrial heritage for the 21st century, and a little bit about place shaping post-COVID. So the first thing you're going to ask me is, where is Calderdale? And my Scottish accent's very misleading here. It's definitely not in Scotland. It's in the north of England between Leeds and Manchester, set deep in the Pennine Hills with lots of valleys, 6 market towns, 210,000 people. Was the cradle of the Industrial Revolution, textiles, weaving, and it was a real northern powerhouse, big in the 19th century, but we're now in the 21st. We saw the old story of the north of England, and our story really could be any town's story. Gradual decline, work went abroad, mills fell silent, and we're left with an extraordinary rich heritage of industrial buildings, chimneys, mills, rivers, of course, because all the water that fueled the steam power is still coming down our hills, and with climate change there's even more of it. And lots of pack horse trails taking the wool to market across the Pennines. That decline of the actual work went alongside, at that time, in the middle of the 20th century, a bit of a loss of pride and identity in place, and a bit of sort of closing in. And people commuted further and further for jobs. So the question is, how do you address these things? Story of every northern town. And what did we actually have going for us in Calderdale? Strangely, the first thing that we had going for us is the obvious one. But the second thing we had going for us was something that's a bit of a surprise. I'll start with the first one. The first thing is that industrial heritage. Yes, in some ways, it's a millstone literally round our necks. In other ways, it's a fantastic asset. We have got what I've learned to call green and blue infrastructure, heather-covered moorlands, hills, fantastic tracks and trails, steep hills. So we had the Tour de France. In 2014, we have the Tour de Yorkshire cycle race. We started to attract TV and movie companies to come and film things like Ackley Bridge. Some of you will have seen Gentleman Jack, with HBO and the BBC. We constantly have tourism calls saying, "Hi, I've got 70 lesbians from Texas. Can you put them up next week?" So we have developed our film and TV offer. We've developed a tourism offer using that industrial heritage. If you want to show a street in the 18th century, Hepton Stall's your place. So there were those sort of opportunities. But we also started to try and repurpose some of our fine inheritance, some of our fine, handsome civic buildings and prosperous buildings, with a solid mass and a presence in all of our market towns. Dean Clough, a former carpet factory, the biggest in Europe at one time, now has lots of businesses, arts, galleries, etc. Peace Hall, magnificent cloth exchange market, like an Italian piazza, and Shibden Hall, where Gentleman Jack was filmed. So we're looking actually at our market towns and our old buildings through a new frame, which is not the frame of the 60s and 70s of demolition. It's the question of, what do we do in the 21st century to repurpose these buildings? Is it actually housing? Are we no longer afraid of having density in our town centres, good housing? Is it incubator units, the usual sort of things, rather than building industrial estates on the edge of town? Or is it north shoring? Do you want somewhere very handsome to have as your headquarters? We have those places. The second opportunity I've mentioned, which in some ways is strange and perverse, which is that all of the water that came down the hills to fuel steam is still coming down our hills, and it's flooding our valleys as climates change. It's interesting that Cathy said something about learning from disasters. We were actually very, very badly flooded in 2015 and again this year. And it was catastrophic in many ways, but it gave us a real opportunity to rethink our market towns and what they needed and how we as a council worked with them. We don't always get it right, and Mary will tell you about that. We realised that post-flooding, in terms of the physical infrastructure, it wasn't just about the walls to keep the river in. It was about how people were resilient, how their individual homes were resilient, how the place looked and felt after the flooding alleviation work was done. And I think one of the things that we learned, and we're still learning, is that we don't actually have the same answer for everything. One size does not fit all in terms of towns and placemaking. We think actually, we believe, and we would, as Calderdale, that there's been too much emphasis on cities. Of course there has, core cities, etc. Now the focus needs to move to towns and actually their contribution to quality of life issues. And I think that's why flooding was really important to us. Do you actually abandon these towns and move to the green belt and the hilltops, or do you actually make these towns work? And it isn't just about the physical walls keeping the rivers and canals in. It's about how do you work with people to restore that place to somewhere that's thriving. And the question of how you build back better has got real resonance for us in terms of post-flooding. In order to do that, we had to have more dialogue, and that's what we're working on. We're still not great. We're still a big bureaucratic organisation. We don't always get it right. And as Cathy said, dialogue with the big businesses like Lloyd, Cllr, Royal Sun Alliance, our big employers, with the great and the good in the local communities in terms of town forums, ward forums, etc. but also trying to understand what's different and what actually has to come from the communities themselves. The post-flooding response came from communities themselves. And I think we have learned the levelling up doesn't mean that every single town has to be the same. That has to have one of everything, actually. So every single town, levelling up means each town thrives, but it thrives slightly differently. That's been a really hard lesson for us to learn as a local authority. And that brings me to my final point about place shaping post-COVID. We really think that actually our markets, our food markets, really were important post-COVID. People came back to our towns from the cities that they worked in. They were living there. They were looking for a food supply chain that was reliable, that was local, that was often open air. And actually, people really depended on our markets, and our markets responded 300% increase for some of them. And our community responded in terms of things like cargo bikes to cycle produce around the place. But lockdown also brought back some of that post-flooding experience in terms of people knew each other. There was a strong commitment to kindness, as Mary will describe, helped with food deliveries, helped look after the vulnerable, and actually very much different in each community, influenced by local place and local need. And people were also very, very glad to be in Calderdale with the local green and blue infrastructure. You could go wild swimming, you could walk on the moors. We had fantastic recreational opportunities near at hand. And I think as we actually go forward, I think we will see more of that resurgence of towns and people's appreciation of how they should strengthen towns working together. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Jane. That's excellent. Really, really good to hear about both, as you say, the building on the pre-existing civic heritage, but also making the best out of some of the challenges presented by things like the floods and indeed the COVID crisis, which I'm sure we'll come back to in the questions later. You mentioned the legendary Mary Cllr of Incredible Edible, who is and it is genuinely no exaggeration to say something of a legend in the community regeneration world as the founder of Incredible Edible in Todmorden. So without further ado, I will pass over to her to tell you about her experiences of actually trying to do community-led regeneration from the bottom up.
Oh, I'm so chuffed that you've invited me. So as an activist, I'll tell the truth as I see it and feel it, because I'm not beholden to anybody. So I won't take very long. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Absolutely. You'll be loud and clear, Mary.
It feels like I'm going a bit slow. So lend me your ears. I wanted to say prick up your ears, because I'm a great fan of Joe Orton, but I won't. So there we go. So the North has 3 fantastic advantages over the softy South, and you may not have heard of them. I'll tell you the first. The first is an absence of males educated at Eton in positions of power. Now, you cannot underestimate that as an advantage. So for hundreds of years, the bishops and the lords have tried to influence the people of the North with their style of leadership, but the Northerners prefer their own. And you might think, that might lead to a lack of diversity. Let's look at Sheffield. Majid, the youngest mayor ever to be voted in, a Somali, a refugee, and a Muslim, and also a member of the European Parliament. So, don't worry for the North about the lack of Eton educated males. We can do diversity and we can find leaders. So that's our first advantage. The second advantage is the weather. It's bloody hard, and a hard rain falls up north. But that really awful weather has been a great benefit to the northern people, because it's made them gritty, it's made them resilient, and it's made them humorous. So the weather, in a sense, any storm that comes, whether it's the bankers screwing up the economy, Brexit or COVID, up north, we've been dealing with beasts bigger than that for hundreds of years. So the third advantage that we have which was touched on, is our landscape. Now, the landscape can be so challenging the further north you go, but that again has developed a kind of creativity and a productivity to get the best out of barren hills, to be creating amazing opportunities using our landscape. So they're the three great advantages of the north. Now, some people would say it is grand up north, but it was even grander before. Well, it was grander before. We've lost a lot over the last 100 years even, but I really think we're faced now with an irrefutable truth that the pandemic has hurt the poor, really hurt the poor more than other people. And where are those poor people? A lot of them are in the north. This is irrefutable evidence. So I would say, let's not go on harping on about the past. Some people would say, that's politics. That's always been that way. The poor and the north have been left out. Well, let's just stop it now. Let's stay in the here and now and sort it out, because this is the greatest opportunity in the whole of history to sort out the shit we're in now. We can absolutely do it. Nothing, we talk about building back better, but I tell you now, absolutely, and I know it to be a truth, nothing can change unless we reinvest in people. 20 years ago, let's say, roughly, every single housing provider, social council or otherwise, big housing provider, employed people to reach out to those on the wobbly side of life, the poor, the lonely, the troublesome. That's what they did. Those people still exist. But now they've morphed into rent collectors. So people will knock on your door. What is it in your life that's so difficult that you can't pay your rent on time? So this is the world we live in now. 20 years ago, every authority in England employed community development workers to help people dream. We had youth clubs, community centres, and a whole range of things that are no longer there. If people aren't encouraged to dream, we're in a bad way. Because I can tell you that small encouragement have remarkable outputs. It was many years ago that John Thompson was working up here in our area, and I said to him, what do you think? We'd like to grow vegetables in public places. We'd like vegetable tourism. We'd like to use the currency of kindness, and we don't want an empire. He went, oh, just go for it, Mary. You can do that easily. And that encouragement has led to a worldwide copying of the model in Todmorden. And honestly, what did it cost? Was there any planning involved or consultation? It was words of encouragement that you can do things. And here in Todmorden, we practice what we call radical community activism. We don't take public money. We use our own money. We're completely sustainable. We care about the birds, the bees, the soil, the town, the economy. You'll love this. At the beginning of COVID, some great good boffin in the papers said 30 towns, I'd like to know got much paid for this, 30 towns, market towns are going to suffer terribly because of the pandemic, and Todmorden was right on the list. Actually, shops are opening up in Todmorden, new restaurants are open post-COVID. Well, we're not post-COVID, we're bang in the middle of the nightmare. So places are actually opening up.
1 minute, please, Mary.
1 minute. Okay, so I want to say that yesterday, 25 willing workers were out, COVID protected and all the rest of it. cleaning up the railway station where we've got great connectivity. But what is connectivity? What is building back better without building people? Because for sure, we're sleepwalking into a unsustainable dream world if we don't work with people. And you, the great, the mighty, and the good, you could just blow on that spark of COVID kindness, and we could create a fire across this country of people willing to help out and not eat out, and to be the change we want to see. So that's all I'm saying. There you go.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mary. Blow on the spark of COVID kindness is definitely the phrase of the event so far. Thank you. I will be quoting you on that. Our last speaker is Mark Cropper, who is going to talk to us a bit about his experience in both the village of Burnside and the town of Kendal, and I think some of the important differences between the experiences of satellite villages and towns themselves. Mark.
Thank you very much. I've just really inspired listening to Jane and Mary. We're just starting what we're doing here. I'm sitting in a place called Burnside. It's on the edge of the English Lake District. And it's a mill village. It's been a mill village for about 750 years. We've still got a mill here. And I, through my great luck, happen to be responsible for that business. It's been around since the 1740s. And trying to kind of like imagine the way forward. The thing about the North is, and obviously I know that obviously there's a play on your title around the word grim. It's not grim here. I mean, the weather can be grim, as we all know, but there's some absolutely amazing places here. Some of the most beautiful places, some of the very best communities. But my sense of the place, having been away and come back, is there's a lot of it that is tired. And our business a few years ago, 10 years ago, was quite tired. And we've been through a process of reinvention. We make paper and advanced materials. So we've got the world's first coffee cup recycling facility. I won't talk about our business, but so the business has been reinvigorated. And I moved back here 7 years ago, and it just really struck me that the place, our village, was tired. It just had no love and attention and care. And every single time something had been repaired, it's just a little bit worse, a little bit uglier. So, I don't know whether it's the wooden gables on a building, the housing association just replaced them all with plastic because it's zero maintenance, and so on and so forth. And so I met up with our parish council, and we sat down. We thought, well, if something's going to happen here, can we think about like how it might benefit the whole? Because we had a couple of housing allocations, and we thought, well, rather than just selling off land to the highest bidder, how can we somehow do it in a more creative way with communities? So what we did is, and I have to say, I knew nothing about placemaking. I knew nothing about holistic thinking. We commissioned a vision. We were very lucky that we found a fantastic team led by a practice called Farrah Huxley. You happen to be local. Some of them you happen to be local to here. And so we did this vision for the village, and it just absolutely opened my eyes to frankly, I hadn't even noticed how bad a lot of the village was, how things had been done. So that was 5 years ago. And once we had this vision, of course, we had to begin to engage with our local council and all the other and the public stakeholders. And what this did is it got me personally just getting an insight into how the public sector works up here. And it was really quite depressing. Well, I think one of the issues is that the private sector just isn't involved enough in public life anymore. It doesn't care enough. It doesn't, just because the capital's maybe a long way away. And it's a long way away. But the other issue that I've discovered is that the public sector itself is so unbelievably siloed. So what we get in our town, for instance, we've got a huge flood scheme that is totally divided the town. And, it could actually be, I just give this an example, not as a point to argue over, but one of the major causes by flood is a bridge at the bottom of our town. But the Environment Agency can't remove the bridge because that's not their responsibility. Their responsibility is flood defences. And Cumbria Highways has no budget to do anything with the bridge. So it's just an example of the output you get from the division in public silence. So this all got me and others dragged into the life of our town. And added to that, we've got a big issue up here, actually, with working age population. We have something like 10,000 too few young people. So, you know what, if we can create an opportunity to retain and attract more, we've got an amazing place for people to live with fantastic jobs. So we've got the relative luxury of actually having jobs, but not the people to occupy them. And yet that's not being solved at all. So to cut a long story short, last year I went around every big employer in Kendal and I said, look, you've got to give us some money to fund a vision for Kendal. And we did that. And actually Mary came to it and spoke very kindly. Charles was actually leading that. And we did it as 100% open to the public exercise. And we got input from nearly 2,000 people. Now, I'm just conscious of time here. It was really an amazing, heartwarming exercise. We spoke to people of every age, we went to them. We didn't wait for them to come to us. That's why we spoke to so many. It was a fantastic exercise. And in fact, what Cathy was saying, her sort of 4-bullet list, effective partnerships, well, that's what we're trying to build here. We're trying to break down the silos. Adopted plan. We have a vision now. It's published. It's an amazing, beautiful, creative, compelling document. We haven't started. We've done open communication. And we're planning to do a lot more. We've got lots of action we can be doing. There's loads of small-scale stuff we can do. But I say all of this, and actually, we've done nothing in our vision. We're doing a lot in our village to get that going in a fantastic way. But in the town, we have had no funding. We're hopeful we might get some off our
Just 1 minute, please, Mark.
Yeah, we hope we might get some off our council. But our LEP won't touch it. They say it doesn't qualify. We literally have had nothing. We could put this money to such good use. So that's the real thing up north. And it just frustrates me in the north of England. We are still massively underfunded. We had a £17 million rail electrification cancelled because there wasn't enough money. The next day they announced 30 billion for Crossrail 2. That is really frustrating. Arts funding, there's an IPPR report. We need 700 million more in the north to be balanced with the south. This has got to be addressed. There's millions of disaffected people up here. We need to have more funding, and also we need to have devolved budgets so actually we don't have public sector silos.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for a call to arms at the end there. Well, it's wonderful to extol the virtues of proper community engagement and liberating our communities to lead change themselves. We can't lose sight of the fact that 30 billion pounds of funding versus 17 million for electrification does make a difference, and we can't lose sight of the big picture too. Look, we are going to overrun by a few minutes, but I just wanted to throw it open to questions. We've had a few questions coming through on the chat panel. So I think this is probably one for all of you, but I'm going to start with Charles particularly. How often do you actually experience problems with trying to engage with people in the local community to get that sort of active engagement? Because certainly in my experience working kind of very Westminster focused policy silos, there's a lot of cynicism about the ability of community engagement to really tap into meaningful insight and engagement from local people.
Very rarely. I think we're generally very successful. I think Mark mentioned that we go to where people are. as a starting point, and our fulcrum really is usually a charrette process, so there's publicity around that. But we have to go out and talk to people. Not everyone, well, we couldn't cope if everyone came to the actual charrette event. But we particularly working on a whole town level, hundreds of people want to be involved and do become involved. And the idea that it's just the usual suspects, in our experience, is just not the case. We go to schools and all sorts of institutions and just also go up to people at the bus stops and talk to them. So you very quickly build that involvement. And I think that the sort of the local, encouraging the local is absolutely critical to that. So yeah, we have no problems. You can see from the pictures I chose, they weren't sort of specially chosen in any way, but they were just at whole town levels from 20 years ago through to most recent.
Brilliant, thank you. And then we also have a question asking a much more policy-focused one, I suppose. What is the single most powerful change that central government could make to support community-led action to improve places in the north? So I'm going to go around all of you, give you all a chance to answer that, but very, very quickly if you can. Just one thing, if you could wave the magic wand, what would it be?
Well, sorry, I was going to say,
Cathy.
Properly, to recognise, identifying these place leaders is really important. It shouldn't be up to, outside bodies to come in. They can find additional ones through these exercises, but, this network of people that could make the difference has to be found and doesn't just disappear just because the visioning exercise has stopped. That is your capacity. That is your basis for making change happen. So, that needs to be funded within the local authority. We used to have more town centre managers and place managers. We need that again. And those skills need to be valued. As I said, herding high street and town centre cats and working across silos is incredibly complicated. And we need to invest time and skills into that.
Brilliant. Mary, I'm just going around my screen here.
I would say make an insurance policy. You have to have public liability policy to do work in any community. Make it like a quid for everybody.
Brilliant.
Do it.
Yeah, those sort of bureaucratic barriers that can really get in the way of community energy, and you can lose so much momentum just because it turns out you've got to spend 3 months and £500 filling in forms. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Jane.
Give us the money. I must say that. Give us the money. But actually, the MHCLG is, shall we say, lower down in the ranking of the big departments. It's as if local government, which is so close to everyday life, is of much lesser importance. Hear us. We can do things at the local level. Hear us. Listen to us.
Absolutely. And having worked in the centre of government, I'm afraid I can confirm that local government is very, very far down the pecking order, sadly. Mark?
I said it at the end of my talk about devolved powers and budgets. It's a little more, maybe it's a more emotional way of saying that. Trust us. Trust your communities to do good. In fact, when we were choosing who was going to do this Kendall Vision process for us, only Charles was the only bid that suggested we do it as 100% open to the public exercise. And I have to say, all my colleagues I was working on this with were hugely scared of doing this, of trusting the public. But, it was the right thing to do. And that is... don't keep it all centralised. You've got to trust us to do it. It won't be perfect, but it'll be a downsight better than it will be if it's led from Whitehall.
Brilliant. Well, Charles, come in there.
Can I just follow that up and say, I think I showed this Scarborough example, and having written the book and looked at lots of different case studies, projects that I've not been involved in at all, that ability, that focus on providing funding to follow on from a vision process, where the community can have a signatories to that funding, was critical in lots of places I studied, including Scarborough, where, as Mark's saying, the community were trusted to know what was best for their communities, and also having a person in post who could just do the day-to-day organisation of that process and keep it running and believe in it. in a number of places, where the process was incredibly successful, over time the political system started to kind of overtake it again and pull everything back into their arms. But that can take a number of years. But the process works by decentralizing.
Okay, so basically I'm going to summarise that as the message to government is give us the money but don't control it in any way, shape or form, which I can tell you is a very, very hard sell to the Treasury. But that is the message we'll take from them. So look, thank you all very, very much for your excellent contributions. It's been really inspiring to hear some of the case studies and the visions that and the expertise that you all have. I am going to, just before we all go, I'm going to have one last try at this poll and see if it works. And hopefully it will. Yes. Oh. Okay, I'm going to have to create it myself, I think, is the... so the question was, if you recall, for the north of England, is COVID... Come on, you can work. No, it's not. It's not going to work. We've been... There we go. Okay, so let's see if this works. That should say for the north of England. That's just a typo. Sorry for doing this live. COVID is more of an opportunity or more of a threat? And I'll give you all 1 minute to vote on that. And so while you do that, I will just say thank you very, very much to all of our speakers for joining us. Thank you also to our sponsors, JGP, and to Onward and Create Streets for organising this event. And I really would encourage everyone to dip into some of the other sessions. I think it's a fantastic looking programme. And although this format is certainly, in some ways a technical challenge for those of us who haven't worked out how to do some features in advance, apologies for that, it's actually a fantastic way to be able to access a huge range of different opinions and expertise that, let's face it, we probably wouldn't otherwise do, especially not if, like me, you're just sat in your shed staring at a computer screen. So I really do encourage you to engage with the rest of the day. I think the results are now in, and it's pretty overwhelmingly, by a margin of 2-1, that COVID represents more of an opportunity than a threat to the north of England, which I can only conclude demonstrates the force of the positivity and the optimism that came through in the session. So thank you all very, very much. Enjoy the rest of the event, and I will hope to see you all in real life once we're allowed out. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye-bye.